Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. On this episode, we tackle a Hellcat Supercharger install on our 5.7 Pursuit. If you plan on building one, check out my new website where I source all the hard parts you need for your Hellcat project. I also provide one-on-one virtual coaching to help you get your ride back on the road. Now I'm really excited about this episode because it combines two things that I've never done before. I've never added a power adder to a car, so never supercharged or turbocharged a car that originally came naturally aspirated. And I've never added E85, but we're gonna do both today. And I'm gonna show you how easy it is because I have the full parts list with everything you need to get it done from start to finish. Everything that you see on the channel today is not sponsored, so you're going to get real reviews from how I feel about it, installing it for the first time. Let me walk you through some of the basics that you'll need. I went to the great folks at CFR Performance and got two of their kits. The first one is for our drive belt. So it adds in two idler pulleys and allows us to use the 5.7 serpentine belt system to fit the Hellcat Supercharger pulley. So it comes with all of the hardware that you need. The second kit deals with Supercharger mounting. These are adapter plates that allow you to put your 6.2 Supercharger on top of your 5.7 or 6.1 block. It comes with the gaskets that you need. You can't use factory gaskets anymore because it doesn't have the O-rings. And this is everything that you need to be able to mate the Supercharger to your existing cylinder heads. You're gonna need to do something about your valve covers because the way you fill oil and the way you use your PCV system is through the intake on the 5.7. So I'm going to use these also from CFR. Going to use this oil fill, probably put it right there. And I'm gonna drill additional holes for my PVC system and run it using this. I thought these were powder coated when I first got them, but they are painted. And it comes with the hardware necessary, so you got pretty much everything that you need, including standoffs for your coil packs. We'll see how this ends up working with the coil packs that are on here, because there's some differences in the Hellcat valve covers that ends up flipping your coils around. So I wanted to go without that. Let's see if this will work. This, while not required, I feel like it'll give a really nice look. Not sure if I'm gonna be able to make it work or if it's going to fit, but we will see. If not, we'll just go without it. I'm sure I can get a really good deal on these. I do have the ECM from a 6.2, but we're gonna go without that, so that's not needed. This and this are going to be great ways for us to recoup the $1,700 that I bought the Supercharger for. So we have the monstrous Supercharger from our 6.2 Hellcat, and it's one of the more recent renditions of this Supercharger, so thankfully it'll be able to work really well with our setup. And then right here, we went to eFlex and got their E85 Pro kit that will allow us to update everything we need to get E85 running through here. So we can turn up the boost even more. We can safely install this on our 5.7 and keep temperatures cool. There's a couple odds and ends that you need in addition to what you've seen so far. We're gonna have to figure out how to cool the Supercharger, how to get fuel into the Supercharger, things of that nature. So with that, let's hop in. Jumping in head first, we need to remove the intake on this 5.7. If we see down here, we've got intake gasket leaks. I believe we have a valve cover gasket leak, so this is perfect timing to get all of that stuff out of the way and make way for our new Supercharger. If you look right here underneath this intake air temperature sensor, you'll see this stud. We need to remove this casting, get all of this out of the way, because that's gonna come in contact with the front end of our Supercharger. We'll get some more light on this and I'll start to zip things away. Remove the wiper arm caps with a flat blade screwdriver, mark the orientation, and then remove the nuts with 15mm socket. Remove the arms and the plastic retention clips, and you can pop this off. All right, so that is much better. We've opened ourselves up for more activities. We can get to the final bolts that are at the back of the intake, especially for when we put on our Supercharger on there. We needed that shroud out of the way. Now we can go to unbolting a lot of the stuff out of the way. We can disconnect our IAC, our intake. Dodge likes to do these tamper-proof clips. So you're gonna have to push the clip and then you can push down on the button, which will release the harness. And that clip method applies to our fuel injectors as well. So we will pull up on this orange tab, push down on the black button that's just past it, and then pull out. Rinse and repeat for all of the injectors along this side. We also need to depressurize our fuel system. This car has not been run in over 24 hours, so I'm less concerned about fuel spilling. What you can do here, you'll see like there's two clip ends on here, so we'll pry them up and back. That'll get rid of this clip. And then we can push down on the connector like that, push in on this gray button right here, and pull out, and that releases the fuel. Depending on how long it's been since the car has been running, there may be fuel pressure built up in the lines. So make sure that it's been at least 12 hours since the car has been on, or go over to your fuse panel, pull the relay for your fuel pump, and crank the engine over several times until the vehicle won't run anymore. That will make sure that there's no excess fuel pressure trapped in the system. Let's move on. Going to reach in here and disconnect the sensor for our brake booster. And then I'll pull the vacuum line that connects to the brake booster as well. I also want to remove this solenoid as well. So we'll do the same thing with the red clip. Disconnected, disconnected. We're getting somewhere now. And on the other side of the car, it's the same thing. Injectors, you have to unplug, and then there's this sensor right in the back that you have to push down and do the same thing. And with those 10 bolts removed, now you can come in and lift up on the intake and get it all out the way. Wow, wow, wow. Not bad. It looks like nobody's ever been down here before. We still have all the foam in place. Everything looks nice and fresh. It's timely that we're down here, so I'm really happy we're able to take a look, because I want to clean out everything that's in here. I also want to replace the valve cover gaskets as well. And looking at some of the residue that's around some of these openings, I would not be surprised if we had a intake gasket leak. It also gives me a good time to take a look at these coolant passageways that run alongside here, because they do get rusted out over time and they can rupture. But it's never too difficult to get at this and get it fixed. So let me run a vacuum along here and clean everything up. Then we can take a look, inspect our valves, make sure everything looks good from there. All right, so take a look down here at these intake valves. Yeah. These look great. All of them look great. So I'm feeling pretty good about the health of this engine. I just want to clean up the gasket surfaces, make everything nice and neat, and then we can get our adapter plates bolted up. All right, so we got our intake surfaces all cleaned up. The next step, before we even bother with adapter plates, we want to get rid of this perch right here. So we got to cut right along here and remove this piece. Like I mentioned earlier, that's going to get in the way of the supercharger snout. So I'm going to throw plastic across the entire engine and cover some of the engine bay as well, so that we don't have aluminum going all over the place. And with that done, we can take our cutoff wheel and start to chop away at this thing. I'm going to use a combination of my cutoff wheel and my belt sander to get a finished product out of this. The 4.5-inch cutoff blade is perfect for this. Just take your time, go around the entire area, and there's going to be a certain section that you can't reach with the tool. Just take a pry bar and pop it off. After that, I just come back with my belt sander and round off all of the jagged edges. All right, so that's it. Once you take off that much off of here, I just grinded everything smooth, and that's good to go. I'm gonna take off the valve covers and the coil packs next, replace them with the brand new ones from CFR. One of the main reasons I went to these over the stock ones, besides the look, of course, is I need to make provisions in here for oil fill and PCV. I need to drill out a 1 3/8 inch hole, maybe right here, so I can get my fill tube set in place. I want to take off the existing valve covers first so I can see what type of clearance I have. That may alter where exactly I place this oil fill cap and the PCV system. Now, it's always a good idea to place your coil packs in the same order that you plan to reinstall them. While it's not required, it's just good practice. Removing the air box and getting at the 10 8mm bolts all around the valve cover will help pop it off. That'll allow you to get at the bottom bolts here. Everything down here is 8mm. Everything for the coil packs is 10mm. Taking a close look at the valve train, everything looks really, really clean. It's an ode to regular service intervals, courtesy of Ohio State. So I have my valve cover here for the driver's side, and I'm getting ready to drill into it. I have my Harbor Freight saw arbor with the 1 3/8 hole saw, and I want to demonstrate how this oil fill is going to look. So this that I'm holding in my hand will go underneath the valve cover, and the O-ring will apply the seal. This ring will go on the top side and screw into this, and we'll lock it in place with this Allen key. And then this cap will go on top, and that will serve as our oil fill cap. The only question is whether the thickness of the oil cover plus these ribs be too much for these threads to overcome. If it is, then I'll just take my belt sander and sand these down in order for this collar to screw on smoothly. Let's get after it. And yep, it's just how I suspected it. If I put the collar through here, there is not a lot of teeth for the collar to get a bite on. So thankfully, I've already marked out what I need to remove. We'll get our belt sander and fix that really quickly. All right, and here we are. What I've done is beveled all of the edges, so we got really nice clearance. And with the cap on there, that O-ring creates a really nice seal. So looked great. On to the next thing. Moving over to the passenger side valve cover, this is the front of it. And we're gonna put a hole right here so that we can put in our catch can. And because we're not trying to overpressurize the crankcase, it's important for us to put one in to vent the upper valve train of the car and make sure that we're all good. In some of the research that I've done, it seems more effective to just put on one on the passenger side. I've seen a lot of dual catch can setups be eliminated in favor of a single catch can on the passenger side. So that's what we're gonna go with here. And here is the catch can setup. It has some hoses, the reservoir, bracket to hold it, drain tube down there, all of the fittings that you need, and hose ends, hose barb right there, and a little bit more tubing for the other side of the connection. To finish off the valve cover on the passenger side, I got this vent set. And what it does is it takes an O-ring on the back side inside of the valve cover and puts this nut on the outside, and you have this pass through now that you can get vapors out from inside of the crankcase. So we just insert the threaded end like so, we put our nut on the outside, and then we're all set. So this side is pretty much done. I've torqued everything down here, and I've covered up our intake passages to make sure nothing flies in there. Now I've loosened up this valve cover and I'm ready to pry it off. I just wanted to let you know, this one is pretty tricky. You gotta use a combination of swivels, short and long, 8 and 10mm bolts to get at the coils and the valve cover. So be prepared, have a good assortment of tools, and bring patience. Thankfully, factory gaskets work on this. Looking down here, I'm not sure where that came from. That seemed to be gasket material that came with it. Let's see if I can get it off. Yeah. Not sure where that came from, but feels smooth now. All right, so it looks like I messed up. I've gotten the valve cover on here, but where I drilled a hole for this pass-through, it's pushing up against the rocker arm. So I cannot get this on there without contacting it. I should have drilled a hole further down or somewhere else. So let's take it off and see what we can do to fix this. Through the magic of YouTube, I epoxy welded this back up and drilled at the midpoint of this where I should have in the first place. So now we're ready to reinstall. The best way I've seen to get this valve cover in is not having an intake on. That's first and foremost. Getting everything lined up front to back wise, and then rotating it in. I bent both the transmission dipstick tube and the oil dipstick tube and pushed back this harness that's in this corner just enough to give me enough clearance. And you want to make sure that you clear the valve cover gasket so that that doesn't dislodge as you're trying to make it work. But be patient, give yourself some grace, and should be able to get it in. Just don't go too fast on one side versus the other. There we go. And if you can, try to do a final perimeter check of that gasket to make sure that you're sitting flush. Last thing you want to learn later is that you messed up the gasket somewhere along the line. Everything looks and feels good. Let's get it zipped up. All right, so let me break down the hardware that you get in the CFR kit. You have 16 spacers that go to 16 bolts that'll take care of your ignition coils, and it'll secure them to the top of your valve cover. You have 10 of these bolts with the lock nut washer, and they go in here in these recessed sections for the adapter plates. You have 20 hex heads here that'll go around the perimeter of your valve cover to secure them to the head. You have 3 block offs that could go all the way around your supercharger, i.e. one here, another one down there, and I think a third one around that side that'll serve as block offs if you don't want to use map sensors. And then over here, you have your adapter plate that'll accurately space it from the front timing cover and secure them with longer bolts so that you can add in 2 of your idler pulleys. It'll make a lot more sense, and I'll take it step by step as we add these onto the car, but just wanted a reference point so you know. I didn't think about this earlier, but you'll also need 2 sets of gaskets that go underneath and on top of the adapter plates to sufficiently mount everything to your block. So I'm going to use HZ7765 as the bottom gasket, and then I'll mount my adapter plate on top of that. And the adapter plate will only go one way, so you can't mess that up. The gasket is the same on both sides, so it doesn't matter which way you put it. That's how it'll go. If you're concerned about it wobbling, you can always put a dab of RTV to keep it still, but the adapter plates are very light, so I wouldn't bother with that right now. The most important thing is just cleaning up your surface. Make sure all of that looks clean. That's better. So you want to make sure that these point out that way, the furthest toward the valve cover, because that's where the supercharger bolts in. And then these line up with these holes right along here. One thing to be mindful of these adapter plates, there may be some burrs on the inside of it. You'll see that right there. This right here as well. There's just a little extra material that's left in there, and you just want to make sure you clean all that out. Thread chaser or even just a supercharger screw, just to clean them out, make sure everything looks good, because you don't want to end up cross-threading something because that foreign material is in there. So we'll get that cleaned up, we'll get everything bolted up. All right, so now it's time to take care of my idler pulley setup. And I'm gonna use this, the spacers and the bolts to remove 1, 2, and 3 and get the replacement system in. We'll start off by removing the 13mm bolts. So here are the bolts that I took off in the order that I took them off in, and there are no instructions with this kit. So I gotta deduce what replacement bolt goes where based off of the bolts, how this thing will only line up, and how the spacers interact with the back of this. So it looks like that big one goes there. This other one goes here. And then because this is threaded, that means it has to go up on top. So it should bolt up like that. The medium-sized bolt will go here. And before you tighten it up all the way, do something here where we put the washer on top, bring this bolt through here, and then put this spacer behind it, and that should be the right length and orientation. Looks like it could work, but we got to get our old belt out of the way. That 3/8 ratchet into the tensioner, and then swing that tensioner so that we can loosen the belt. Let's try that one more time now that we have our clearance, which is boom, boom. And then because this is the larger one, I can do that. And then I can put that here. And now for the other one, I can do the same thing, but just know I'm working with the smaller bolt. See, washer, everything here. And I can go underneath here. Okay, so this bolt right here, this is as far as it goes in, and all of the other bolts work pretty well. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to measure what I just marked out, cut it on the threaded end, and then put it back in. With the pulley system completed, it's time I turn my attention to the fuel system. Now, there's a factory line that connected the driver's side fuel rail with the passenger side, and that was cut before I was given the Supercharger. So I have to recreate that line, and I'm using the E-Flex Pro hose and connector kit to do just that. I'm cutting off a piece of that hose. I'm going to use 2 of the fuel lines connectors and just plug it right on in. I'm going to cut this line a little bit later when we get to our ethanol sensor install. Here's the line that I'm going to use for the supply line that comes off of the rail to the supply line that comes from the back of the car. And first up is this really nifty 8AN connector. It snaps onto the fuel rail like so, and it allows me to use that connector without any fuss. I really like the look of these AN lines. I like how secure it is, and I know the system is going to be safe. So then I use this quick connector to AN converter, and this is the factory line that snaps on the 5.7 rail that goes on the driver's side. I'm going to continue to use that line. This next section only applies if you're doing an E85 conversion. So here's our ethanol sensor, and here's where I want it mounted. In order to do that, I'm going to have to cut the midpoint of this hose. So I'll snap that with some shears. I'll cut back a little bit more, and then the rest of the pieces from the kit to snap in place. And then I can secure my harness right beneath here. And here's how it's going to look. Really nice and out of the way. Professional install, nothing to worry about. Next up is fuel injector wiring. Fuel injectors need power and ground to spray fuel. The Dodge's fuse block constantly supplies power, and the computer sends pulses on the ground side for each individual cylinder. That means all 8 power wires on the injectors will be the same color, just like this brown and white wire. Use your multimeter to confirm. The red wire goes furthest from the red tab on the injector connector, just like this. Now you can do that for all 8 connectors, making sure that you hear the click every time the pin is inserted. Just like that, it's all done. This is the original fuel line that's on the 5.7s. It came off of that hard metal line in the back passenger side. And we're gonna put this back in, since this end puts us perfectly in the position where that line off of the supercharger comes. We're gonna reach back behind here. Wait till we hear the click. There it is. And we'll keep you out of the way and be ready to plug you in once we get the supercharger on here. And now it's time to install the supercharger for the very first time. And my cheat code is this: lower it so that the passenger side rear goes on first. There are dowel alignment pins on the passenger side only. And once you align one, it's very easy to make sure everything else fits. It looks beautiful, but I have one problem. I did not clearance this section enough. And if you look real close, it's hitting up against it and it's not fully seated on the adapter plates. So I need to go back at this. I need to take the supercharger back off and trim that down some more. But at least I know the measurement. Maybe 1/4 of an inch would do it, but it just goes to show you. You're not really done until you're done. But it fit relatively smoothly. I had to take off the hood shocks and pop the hood all the way up. I had to take off the strut bar as well, and I had to bend this transmission line out of the way to clear my fuel line. But the plan is to bend this back a little bit so we can get it sitting here, hopefully in front of the coolant passageways, but behind the fuel line. That should be good enough. So I'll lift this up, I'll trim it a little bit, and we'll get everything torqued down. Seeing the supercharger sit down on top of my first cut was really helpful because it helped me determine where exactly I needed to do my finish cut. And having that lift worked wonders. Highly recommend. All right, so it's officially in. I have to screw down the 5 bolts that are on each side, but it's finally sitting on here and it's no longer on my workbench. So happy. It looks great. I know the hood is not gonna close though. Take a look at that. It's higher than the cowl right now. I don't even know if I can get that strut bar back on, but we'll see. I am just elated that this thing fits and it looks good. And from here, it's just a few wires that we got to connect. We got to get the rest of the E85 system on and we'll be good to go. One thing that I did notice, I didn't understand why people were getting the upgraded pulley, but if you look here, that's clearly a reason why. The belts don't line up with the pulleys. So we need to get something, we need to get a replacement belt pulley that'll bring this out here, and that way we'll be able to put our belt on and spin everything up. We got the rest of that clearance down here. It's looking really good. And that just goes to show you, on that side, you need to take it pretty much all the way down. Make sure you don't cut into the timing cover. If you see oil, you've gone too far, but that's perfect for me. And it's looking so good. I can't wait, can't wait. We can't celebrate too early though. I did not tighten these bolts down for a reason. We're gonna have to lift off our supercharger lid, lift the supercharger up a hair, and get this snout off so we can replace this pulley. We're going to need to purchase and install the Metco pulley kit and flip it so that these ribs line up with the rest of this pulley system. We'll start off by removing all of the T30 bolts across the lid and the 5 that are right on top. We'll get that out of the way. A little bit of oil, but nothing too crazy. Taking a look, a little bit of oil, that's part of the core, so I'm not worried about that. Everything spins freely. The impeller looks good. Those fins look really nice. Get our bypass valve out of the way as well. We'll lift up on the supercharger a little bit, put a block of wood underneath it just to rest it on there. And then there's 6 bolts all around the snout, 3 on top, 3 on bottom. We'll get those off and we'll get everything out of the way. Oh, okay. There it is. It's off. Make sure you don't lose any of those. I'm gonna make sure they stay on the other side so I can put it in exactly the way it came off. I don't think that's necessarily needed, but you can never be too careful. This gasket looks in really good condition. I don't see any rips or tears. It appears to be synthetic in nature. It's not paper, so that's awesome. And everything on here seems reusable, which is, like I said earlier, a great plus because we know how long it's taking for me to get some of these cooling supercharger items, and we don't want any additional delays. Thanks to the folks at HHP Racing, I have my Metco installation kit with my 2.85 supercharger pulley. Now you can get the stock one all the way down to 2.4, but 2.85 is going to give me a lot to work with as far as potential for spinning the supercharger, and I can always tune it down with my boost controller. So including with the kit, you get the 2.85 pulley with the adapter, the cover that we won't be using for this application, the pin holding tool that takes care of holding the back of this supercharger snout, and then the pulley tool that will go on the front after I remove this dust cover, and we'll be able to spin and remove the old pulley, attach and install the new one, and then we'll be all set to reinstall the snout. Here goes. We'll start off by disconnecting the pulley from the adapter. Now remember, we're gonna have to flip this pulley inside out so it'll be facing like this when we go to reattach it to the supercharger snout. This is why you see a lot of the conversions done with this sticking out of the snout, because you need to give it that distance from your new one. And then we'll just line up here and reconnect. What I've also heard is that this is not giving you enough spacing. You actually need to put spacers on the face to have it stick out even more. So I may hold off on reconnecting that pulley until I get it all back on the car, and that way I can take a look at the belt and how the rest of the pulleys are lining up. In order to get the cap off of your old supercharger snout, you got to use a flathead screwdriver and get beneath it. So go really close to the edge on that side and use a lot of force because you'll need it. Once you're at here, you can use your HP 1000, stick it in there, and after that you can use a 15/16 socket and your HP 2000 holding tool to start to get at this. Your HP 2000 comes with a holding bolt that we'll use to secure this along the supercharger snout. So we'll line this up until the posts line up. Then we'll rotate the housing assembly until we get the bolt hole to line up. And then we'll attach it like so. It doesn't need to be super tight, but we just want to make sure that this paddle doesn't go anywhere once we start to apply tension. So here's what it looks like on this side. Then on the other side, we'll reattach our HP 1000 and our socket and use an impact to break these. If you don't have an impact, it's going to be really difficult for you to try to do this, but a lot of leverage on both sides will be your best friend. Hopefully this works. Wow, that was easy. That was really easy. There it is. Old one is off. We'll get our new one on. Per the instructions on this kit, we're going to tighten it by hand and then 40 pounds of pressure to secure this center bolt. And from here, we can reattach our supercharger snout, being careful that we line up everything. Now it's time to reattach our pulley. Folks have had to use spacers and or washers to reattach the pulley to the adapter. Everything looks like it's lining up for me, but you can only tell once you start to put torque on it. If everything looks good, we'll take it back off, apply Loctite to these threads, and then torque it back down. With that connected, we can put on our belt. Here's the belt that I've been using. It comes highly recommended on many of the interchange sites, and I'm using a smaller pulley, so I'm hoping that the tensioner can take up some of the slack from that. If not, we may have to go one size lower, but let's see how it does. All right, and here's how it looks with the belt attached. Everything looks to be really good. Now, with this 2.85 pulley, this tensioner is near its max. If you look right down here, you'll see that is the maximum tension that it can apply. It's really at its stop. So what I would do if I were you all, I would either get a larger pulley or get a smaller belt. This is good enough for us to run, but I'm not gonna put it under heavy boost. I'm not gonna put it under boost at all until I get a smaller belt for this thing. Next up is our oil catch can. We're gonna use the short bolt that we got from our adapter plate swap with this hole that's right here in the head, combined with the lines that came with this kit and this line coming off of the supercharger that goes right here at the intake. None of the lines that come with the kit are big enough to fit right here. So we're going to use this spliced in with this, and this line, thankfully, is going to be a really great size for our valve cover job. So let's hook it all up. So here's our stock supercharger line. We're going to cut away this insulation and get right at the plastic line. And I'm really glad we separated that because look at this. I'm gonna try using this end. You can really use either or. The main difference is a second O-ring in here that usually goes here. I'm going to keep this end as a good end in case I want to use it in the future. I'm going to cut and skin back this plastic piece and then adapt that to fit our line right here. Once we have that, we can connect it to our catch can. With our connector looking like this, we can start to plumb out what the rest of the system is going to look like. And here's what it ends up looking like. We've got our bolt secured, we've got our lines ran, no kinks, and a clamp right on the bottom there. So the next thing we need to do is hook up our E-Flex Pro kit and get E85 running through our injectors. Now there are 8 injectors on this, and we need to run 4 on this side, 4 on that side. And since that's the far side, we're gonna run our injector extension wires over there. These injector extensions are pretty long, and they'll be great to wrap around the back side of the engine, secure them really well, and make sure that we have a really clean installation. Let me show you on this side what that will look like. So as you can see from right here, all 4 of our injectors are disconnected. Each injector extension has these 3 cables. This one goes to the injector, this one goes to the injector wire harness, and this will go to the E-Flex Pro wire harness that goes on the passenger side of the car. So we'll make that connection. We'll connect this one to the injector. And we'll route our wire behind the engine and mimic that connection to all 3 of these, making sure that our wire routing looks nice and clean. I've done the same thing with the wire routing on the passenger side. Everything looks nice and neat. Finally, we have our temp sensor. Now, this is supposed to go near the engine block. I'm gonna route it real close to the supercharger down here. That'll help the E-Flex Pro kit know how hot the engine is getting, help prevent detonation. We also have a ground wire here that I'll connect right here. There's a 10mm nut that you take off and you can zip this right to it. And then you can run additional inputs through this wire. And I'll be using a map sensor to drive that as well. I just have to run power and ground, and then I can use this as a signal wire for that. Let's take care of some emissions controls. This solenoid usually routes right here on our base 5.7, and we're gonna do it the same way for this one. The tube routes right back here, and it's too short for our supercharger. We need to reconnect this line that goes right behind the throttle body. And then I'm going to use a piece of hose to join this with the factory line here. And then that will bring us right down here. We can build a bracket that goes off of this nut right here and then reconnect it just like that. If I end up using the engine covers, then this will all be hidden by it. Can even tuck this in or get a 45-degree angle right here so it can tuck really nicely right behind the harness. Now on the other side of the connection, I'm gonna have to cut this back this way and then add some extension so that we can get this connected right underneath here. Be sure to save this connector so we can still get a positive connection right here at the back of the solenoid. Here's the bracket for that same solenoid, and we're going to repurpose this on our supercharger. We'll clamp it into the vise, and then we'll chop off this end right here. And once that's back in, we can reconnect it. Now that we've cut this tube, and then we have this other end that goes to the solenoid, we need a way to bridge that gap. And I used a few inches of 5/8 hose to connect the two ends. For our factory replacement map sensor, I'm going to remove this one that comes naturally off of the Hellcat and replace it with the stock one. I've added a O-ring right here, and I've shaved down on those ears at the ends. And just for first start, I want it to be able to read map sensor voltage, but in the meantime, I do have an SRT4 neon map sensor that has the right connections and will fit the screw hole in the perfect place. With the map sensor done, I did run a new line down from here, and it'll connect to our brake booster right behind here. I have the sensor that I plucked off of the old intake. And then finally, I plucked the old intake air temp sensor out, and I need to work on a wire extension harness so I can bring it over here where we have a new Hellcat intake coming in. So you've been with me throughout this entire event, and we're getting ready to start it up for the first time with the Hellcat Supercharger on there. What I'm going to do first is I have to reprime the fuel system, so I'll turn the car on a couple of times, make sure that I have good fuel pressure up to the rail, and then on the third time, I'll start it up and we'll see the first start. All right, so we got the system primed, and now it's time to start it up and see what it does. Sounds good. That is the coolest sound ever. So first start went well. It was exactly what we would expect. And the whine is really prominent, especially with the smaller supercharger pulley. With the E-Flex Pro kit, we can start to tune everything, take a look at our sensors, see how we're doing there, and make sure we dial everything in so we have a safe tune that won't blow up this engine. In our next episode, what we'll do is we'll pin the crank, we'll hop into tuning, we'll replace the map sensor with an SRT4 one and do all of the supercharger cooling efforts so that we can have a really safe system. If you like what you see in this video, drop a like, let me know how I did in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Talk to you in the next one.